because you record it, and let's see. There's a couple other people. Did you feel like saying hello?
Am I on here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm here. It's nice to see you all.
Good to see you too, or hear you.
Yes, do I not have it? Do I not have my camera on?
I can't see you, but
here, start via it. Yeah, here we go. I think. Here I am.
Oh. Great.
I'm Diane Ducey. I'm a radio personality in town, and my son Aiden will be graduating on Sunday from Unity. I recognize a lot of people in this meeting, so I'm glad to be a part of it, and I appreciate Sheila leading me in, as just getting used to puns and the transition from, you know, the school into adulthood that we're facing soon. So that's why we wanted to come and try to pay attention and take some notes here in Tolono.
Great. Meg, looks like you were waving your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Meg Briskin, and my daughter Chloe is turning 18 on Saturday, which is the day after tomorrow. So we're here to learn about services, and Sheila Krein gave us the link. So thanks, Sheila.
Yeah, thanks for inviting people, Sheila. We love that. Sarah, did you want to say hi? I saw your camera pop on down there. Oh, I don't think we can hear you yet. It looks like you unmuted, but I'm not sure.
Oh, me?
Oh, sorry, other Sarah, Sarah Wilhelm.
Oh.
Let's see. You're gonna pass. That's fine too. If you figure it out later and want to say hi, you're totally welcome. Anyway, so I guess we'll kind of jump into it. So we are, so Community Choices, there's enough new people here. I'll just give us the little quick elevator speech about kind of what we do. So Community Choices is a human services co-op, which means that folks have the opportunity to join the cooperative if they want to. It's not a requirement for most of our services, but it does give people an opportunity to get to know other parents, get to know other participants, kind of learn from each other. We have most of our like social opportunities, our leadership opportunities, family support, family parties, and that kind of stuff are all sort of housed in our cooperative section. So we love it when people want to join us, but we also have a community living program where we work with folks to, for the most part, to find apartments in the community and then sustain and learn the type of skills that they're going to need in order to make that something that lasts for the long term. And then we have a customized employment department too, where we work with folks to find jobs in the community. And so all of our services are kind of one-on-one support. We aren't able to generally provide support sort of indefinitely, but we do a lot of push and support up front to get the person sort of set up to figure out what's going to work for them, hopefully get them connected to some natural supports, and kind of get them going on their own, and then provide sort of ongoing support as needed. So that's a quick version. We're always kind of adjusting and changing things depending on what the folks depending on what folks need, and these type of meetings when we get to talk to families and hear from people is honestly one of the best sources of information that we have when it comes to figuring out what the community needs and what sort of services we should be providing. So I'm always grateful to have you all here. So we got somebody else joining, but I am going to go ahead. So tonight we are going to talk about just sort of the service system, specifically the state service system. So like PUNS funding, the Medicaid waiver, home-based support, all of these things that people, we talk about them all the time. Some people use different names for them. We're going to talk a little bit about just kind of who's involved, what the process is, and then we're going to focus more specifically on home-based support and just the real practical sort of process of how that works. and then I'm sure that there will be time for questions. And if you guys are confused with me chatting along the way, please feel free to stop me. You can type messages in the chat. I will do my best to keep an eye on those. Hannah, if you want to keep an eye on them too, and if I miss something, please just interrupt me. But yeah, I guess we will. So I guess the first thing that I was curious of before I jump into it was just how many people here actually have funding, like waiver funding, home-based support. Currently, I know a couple of you guys. I see a hand. Awesome. And then I know a couple other people. So, okay. Do you guys have a general sense of what the PUNS list is? Have you guys heard of that? Or like not so much? Seeing some head nods. Okay, I don't go into PUNS a ton, but I will kind of go well, the sort of the first step, but we will go through that as well. So here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so y'all can see my slides. Let me get my little screen set up here. It's always like I love to be able to see everybody's faces while I talk, but it's hard to then be able to see my screen too. So bear with me here. Okay, can you guys see this all right? How about that? Is that okay?
Yes.
It's fine.
Okay, so here we are, waiver services and demystifying home-based support. So first, what are waiver or state services? So when we talk about this, these waiver services, this is the majority, this is how the majority of support for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities are paid for across the state. So waiver services, they're sort of designed and structured at the state level. And so different providers are different all over the state, but it's statewide. The funding works statewide. It's a waiver. They call it a Medicaid waiver because the services and supports that you can that are offered through the waiver are paid for through Medicaid. So instead of just thinking of Medicaid as like a medical, in order to get to the doctor, get prescriptions, that kind of thing, it also pays for actually an abundance of different types of what they call home and community-based services. And so there's actually 9 different waivers for different sort of different groups in the state of Illinois. Like there's one for traumatic brain injury. There's other ones that I always get to this point and I'm like, oh, I should have written them down. But essentially, there are 9, and 2 of them are specific for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so there's 2 basic ones. So when you break it down, there's really there's 2 choices, and there's lots of little pieces within those. But the first is a CILA. So that's, and that stands for Community Integrated this is supposed to be Community Integrated Living Arrangement, or essentially a group home. And so there's different types of CILAs. For the most part, the CILAs are what you think of as a pretty sort of traditional group home, where there's usually between 4 and 8 people who are living there, and they have 24-hour shift staff that are coming in providing, cooking and doing all the other various supports that somebody might need. So with this option, sort of the agency is sort of able to provide supports across a wide, sort of the whole spectrum of the type of supports and services the person might be looking for. The other option is home-based support, and this is what we call sort of the self-directed model. And we're going to talk about this in much more detail later on, but essentially, that's the one where you kind of get to pick and choose and sort of create a little bit more of an a la carte version of what services look for, or what services you are looking for. Eligibility. So the criteria, and it's always like a little bit fuzzy, but they try to make it pretty, draw the lines pretty strict, is essentially a diagnosis of an intellectual or developmental disability. They do look at IQ. We all probably know here that like this is not a great measure of anything, but that is one of the tools that the state does use, and they do look for an IQ below 70, as documented before, ideally before the person's 18th birthday. Sometimes people haven't had that testing before they're 18, and there's ways to kind of get around that. And then they need to have, again, it's very much of a deficit model in terms of the eligibility, which I know for a lot of providers that try to be really person-centered, it's hard to even like want to talk about it. But essentially the person needs to show deficits in 3 of the 6 daily living categories, which are self-care, learning, mobility, language, self-direction, and capacity for independent living. So this is just kind of that sort of self-direction and doing the things to make sort of everyday life work. So if you meet those criteria, you can get added to the PUNS list. And so the PUNS list, when we talk about it, is actually just the waiting list for waiver services. People often say PUNS funding, which is fine. People will know what you mean. But essentially, the PUNS list is actually the waiting list for those services. So it's the prioritization for urgency of need for services. And so right now I made this a little while ago. It's a pretty wide range, but there is between 7,000 and 20,000 people on that list at any one time. So obviously waiting to access those services is a problem for many, many, many families all over the state. And so actually one of the things we're going to talk about later on is what families can do specifically in Champaign County while you're waiting, because there's actually a ton of things you can do really anywhere. But here specifically, there's a lot of options. And so just sort of the overall sort of picture of like the people who are involved in waiver services. One of them is just the person. I'm usually just going to call them the person, or maybe the person using services, but just in terms of like definitions for the presentation. So we, as Community Choices, sometimes we'll call people participants or members because we are run as a cooperative. A lot of people sort of chafe at the word client or consumer. People feel a lot of different ways about this, so you know, your personal opinion. The other person is the independent service coordinator, or the ISC. And essentially, this is the person who's the liaison between the person and their family and the state. So DHS and the folks who are providing the money to pay for these services and the kind of rules and administrative overarching kind of setup to pay for those services. Every person who gets waiver funding will have an ISC. An ISC is in charge of doing what they call conflict-free case management, or essentially they work with the person to develop their person-centered plan. And you know, they go through a long discovery process where they really work with the person to sort of get to know what they're really looking for, get to know their family, what their needs are, what their interests are, and they kind of boil that down into what they call outcomes. And so these are basically just goals, and they can really be anything. A lot of times they're very practical things like John would like to get a job, or Susan would really love to make some more friends, or, you know, Bill is gonna, you know, learn how to do laundry. But sometimes they're a little bit more kind of out there. Like they really can be anything. It's like, I want to go to Disney World. And really, it should be driven by what the person is really looking for, what's going to make their kind of experience in the world most positive. So there's the ISC, and they're a resource. They write the plan, they help you find providers, and then there's the service providers. And so Community Choices is a service provider, in town DSC is a service provider, IAG, and there's tons across the state. We don't have a ton here locally, but those are a lot of those organizations can provide those waiver services and other services. So again, that kind of waiting period, like don't be scared. There's plenty to do there. I couldn't get the font on this to be bigger, so I'm really sorry. It's probably very difficult to see. But essentially what this is trying to show is that, so there's the Illinois State Disability System, And then there's the kind of off of that, there's the Department of Human Services. And so there's 2 divisions within the Department of Human Services that provide support. And so this one in the middle here, which has less boxes, is the Department of Rehabilitation Services. Sometimes people will call it DRS. Sometimes people will call it DOORS. So if you hear that or hear that kind of acronym, they're probably talking about Department of Rehabilitation Services. And again, I know this is tiny, but they pretty much provide like 3 main areas of support. So they do home services. These are supports like in-home supports. So folks who maybe have more of a physical disability are often going to be using kind of PAs and things within this kind of arm of the charts here. They also do different types of employment supports and educational supports. And so if you are working with somebody or if you are somebody that is looking to find employment, DRS is the first place that you can go. You don't even have to worry about the PUNS list. You can go to DRS and say like, hey, I'm a person with a disability and I would like support in finding work. Or in, figuring out if there's a educational kind of option that would be a good fit for you. They can help with that as well. The very large other section that's circled in red, these are all of the different waiver services. And so over here in this kind of area right here, you guys can see my cursor, right? Yeah, okay. These are the different types of like options when you choose a SILA, so a group home. There's different types of SILAs. Again, like I said, there's a host home model where you have like one person that's providing all the support. It's kind of some states actually call it adult foster care, but it's that kind of model where there's one person living with the person directly and providing the majority of the support. There's some shared living models, intermittent SILA, which is kind of a bridge between the 2. So it's not 24/7 support, but it still does live under that SILA arm of things. And with a SILA, so if you choose to go and try to find a SILA or a group home, you also get access to some kind of day programming support. And so for a lot of people, this is community day services, and there's different ways that that's set up. It can be very employment focused, very like task focused. It can be really focused on getting out and doing things in the community. It doesn't usually involve like getting a job, like getting hired by a business in the community directly. Although sometimes organizations will have like these, they'll like take a crew to go work at a business and then get paid by the agency. And then over here on this very left side of things is the home-based support option. And so here, basically everything that you can get with a SILA, for the most part, you can purchase your home-based support award. But mostly what people use it for is to hire personal support workers, PSWs, and these are folks that it doesn't have to be a highly trained person. It can be a parent, it can be your neighbor, it can be your friend from church, or it can be somebody that you get connected with through an agency. There's some agencies that provide PSWs that you can get connected with. Right now here in town, nobody actually does that. We're working on trying to be able to do that in the future. And then you can also, you could use your home-based support and still say, hey, I want to go to a day program, but I'm still living at home with mom and dad, or I've got my own apartment or something like that. And then there's other clinical services that you can purchase as well. So things like occupational therapy, behavior supports, physical therapy. Some of these things are also options, although a little bit harder to find here locally. People doing okay so far? Any questions about that? Again, I'm sorry, this is hard to read. I always like to know where things fit in a big chart, so that might just be me. So what waiver services are actually available here in Champaign County? So we have traditional SILAs. I think there's about 4 providers. That's changed a little bit recently, so don't quote me on that one. There are host homes. I think there's 2 or 3 host homes that are functioning in this general area, maybe slightly outside of Champaign County. Piatt County Mental Health Center, which is a service provider in Piatt County in Monticello. They do some of this intermittent Zilla where it's kind of like the person lives in their own space, but they get a pretty substantial amount of kind of support from an agency staff kind of coming in to manage daily living. And then, so home-based support comes with this option of what's called an SDA, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, but this is basically somebody, it's essentially like a case manager who helps you manage the sort of complicated bureaucracy that is home-based support and being able to piece together and self-direct all these different types of services. And so this is something that Community Choices does. We work with over 30 families and individuals who have services and kind of help those get coordinated. And DSC does the similar, offers a similar support. Again, nobody does these agency-based PSWs at this point. Sorry, itchy. But hopefully in the future, that's something that's going to be available. And then little boxes in my way. And then behavior supports. There is one organization out of Vermilion County, I think it's called Spring Health, that does provide those like ABA services for people. So that's, I mean, that like those are the official like state funded services that you can get here locally. I'm sorry, there is also a I don't know why I didn't put this on here, but there's day program services through DSC. So again, that's not something Community Choices does, but that is available through both the center in Monticello and through DSC. Okay, so what does this process look like? So start to finish, kind of, here is what the waiver timeline looks like. So first, you enroll in PUNS. Ideally, it's best to do this before the person is 18 years old. Hopefully, it's something that the teachers at your school have helped you get started with. And the place that you do that here locally is the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission. And so if you just even call their main number, they can help you get to the right person. I know Sheila, who's here, and Sarah, they both are transition coordinators who work for regional planning too. So you may have connected with them through the schools, and if you're not on PUNS, they can surely help you do that or send you in the right direction also. And then while you're waiting, sort of every year, you're going to be contacted by somebody from the ISCs. This is where the ISCs come in. Sorry, motorcycle being very loud outside. Those ISCs will reach out to you and just basically check in, update any information, see if your situation has changed, see if your need for services has changed. And then you wait. So this estimate is truly an estimate. Some people do wait 3 years and they are able to get funding pretty quickly. Other people wait 15 years, 20 years. And that waiting period is something that the state of Illinois is working really hard to shorten. They have said they are going to start pulling people off of the PUNS list based on how long they've been waiting, which hasn't been the case until pretty recently. So if something happens, sort of if you need that waiting period to stop in like right away, really the only way to make that happen is if you're in a crisis. And they have a pretty narrow definition of what a crisis is, which is essentially abuse, neglect, or homelessness, or serious risk of homelessness. And so that is something, if you're in that situation, or if you're working with a family who's in that situation, it's a very good idea to get in touch with regional planning and talk to them and see if that's something that they can get started for you. So after you wait, this is a kind of a newer thing that the state has started doing in the last couple of years, is they are they're actually giving people kind of like a pre-selection letter and say, hey, in the next 6 months to a year, you are going to be pulled off of the waiting list to start either using SILA services or home-based support services. And so this gives you that opportunity to kind of really start making plans. From there, you then get the letter that says, okay, you are officially, you have been pulled, and then you go through a clinical eligibility period. And so I'm going to talk just briefly about kind of what to do, like what are some of the things you can do as a family or somebody using services while you're in each one of these kind of like step-by-steps. So this is kind of the first half of the timeline. So before the person is 18 years old, you're going to be kind of working on that enrolling in PUNS, which isn't super hard. You'll need a bit of documentation about the person's diagnosis, about they might need letters from a doctor, a psychological report. Those are things regional planning can help you find. But it's also a really important time to start working with teachers. If employment is a direction you want to know, that's something you should really be talking with the staff at your school about, because they can do a lot of support there and help get people in a really good place when they start to transition out. But also help just sort of figure out what is your family member's interests. What do they like? What are they looking for? And try to help them have as many experiences to sort of discover some of those sort of passions as much as you can. And that's a tall order, and most people are doing that anyway, but it's a really critical time period, for people. And if folks have something that they know that they're interested in and they've tried some things, figuring out kind of how to make good choices later on when it comes to services gets a little bit easier. This annual update, it's a really great time to sort of remind yourself to think about, like, hey, what service providers are in this area? What kinds of stuff should I be considering? You can always talk to providers, even if you don't have funding. Actually, there's a whole slide on that. But it's just kind of a reminder, like, hey, maybe I can be doing a little bit of planning here, asking some new questions. And then we go into this sort of long waiting period. And so this is the period where, like, life happens. Like, your life exists right there when you're in that waiting period, and you don't have to wait for funding to start doing some of the things that are probably going to be the most important to you. And so in Champaign County, we are very lucky to have the Developmental Disabilities Board, and so that uses property tax levies to help pay for services for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so most of Community Choices services and many services from other providers are all paid for through grants, and they're open to anybody who is on the PUNS list, even if they don't have funding, actually specifically for folks who don't have funding, because they may not otherwise be able to access any of those services. And so you also, here in Champaign County, can have a county-based ISC. And so that is somebody whose specific, their specific role is to help you create that person-centered plan, even though you don't have the official funding yet, but then to identify providers in this area that can help you work towards some of those goals that you may have early on. And so if you are just getting out of school, and you want to find a job, or your family member wants to find a job, like, you don't have to wait for to get funding to do that. Like, there's a lot of options actually when it comes to employment. You can do employment services with us. DRS has employment supports. DSC, a lot of their services are open to people with and without funding too. So they're a good place to look for if that's if they have a service that seems like a good fit for you. And then also, like, CUSR has a lot of opportunities for kind of like social, sports, or recreation. Community Choices has a lot of options when it comes to sort of social opportunities and getting out and trying different things. You can apply. It's always a good idea to get on the Housing Authority's mailing list, and you'll get notified if there's any waiting lists that are open, if moving out is something that you're planning in the next, usually you have to wait a little while, so a year, 2 years, 3 years. But it's good to just kind of know what options are out there. It's also, this waiting period is a really, really good time to start doing some planning for the future. So thinking about what is the ideal setup for me and my family? Is my family member somebody who needs 24/7 support? Or are they somebody who's really wants to move out and get their own apartment? Or, are you really set on kind of having, living together as a family for a bit longer, which a lot of people are, but to start thinking not just 1 or 2 years in the future, but what's 5 years, what's 10 years in the future look like, because you can start, kind of putting some of those plans in place and kind of just exploring what those options would look like. And then this is also a really good time to make sure that, you know, that you've enrolled in Medicaid, in Social Security, and other benefit system. You know, your person that you're working or living with or family member might be eligible for SNAP and other benefits. So those are all things that you can get started in this waiting period if that's not something you've already done. And then finally, too, some of that long-term planning. So estate planning is something families will start looking into in this period. I am not an expert in special needs trusts, but there is a lot of good information out there. But that's something people get set up. People will sometimes look into guardianship or guardianship alternatives, powers of attorney, that kind of thing. But those are all really great, great things that you can be working on sort of in that waiting period. And the last thing that I think is really, really important is that that people know that they can reach out to providers themselves. They don't need the permission of you know, being drawn from the PUNS list to start sitting down and touring programs and talking to providers and seeing what's out there. And honestly, I will say, as from the service provider side of things, I love it when families come and talk to us and just try to figure out, like, what is it that you have to offer? And then maybe say, like, okay, well, I think in maybe 6 months or a year, you know, my son's going to be graduating from high school and we'd really love for him to have a job, or we'd really love for him to, you know, start doing some social things out in the community. And it allows us as providers to start planning for that, so that when you get to that like official transition date, we know that person is going to be ready to go, and we can kind of clear our books so that we're ready to work with that person pretty quickly. It gets a little tricky when people sort of call us like the day after somebody graduates high school and say, like, hey, are you ready to serve my person next week? And unfortunately, just because of the way our, you know, capacity works, sometimes there is a bit of a waiting period. So, but if we know kind of what you're looking for a little bit ahead of time, it's a lot easier to make that a bit of a smoother transition. And I'll give you a shout out again, Sheila, too, because I know that you can help people kind of do that as well. So the main takeaway of this is that while you're waiting, you can actually, many people set up a very cool life before you've ever received funding. People find jobs, people find apartments, they get connected to different groups in the community. And so there's a lot, I always like to encourage people to sort of think of it as an exploration period, and definitely something that can be very fruitful. Okay, so I think I talked about this kind of like, you get the early notification and then you get pulled. This is really the time when you want to start talking to providers and figuring out what is it that I really want, because before you're able to get your funding officially, you have to choose what kind you want. So you have to choose between group home SILA and home-based support. Now, it's possible to switch between those two in the future. They've made it a little bit easier in the last few months, honestly, year maybe, but it is still kind of tricky. And so it's good to, you know, if you think you're going to want to switch in 3 months, I would say maybe take some time to consider before kind of being sure. So then once you've decided between the two options, there's the SILA and the home-based support. We're going to assume that everybody here is choosing home-based support because that's what I'm going to talk about. But before I do that, I know I've been talking at you all for a long time. Does anybody have any questions? Is that making sense? Is there anything new people have heard there? Or maybe it's, I know it's probably a review for some of you, but okay. All right. So we're going to just look at kind of the basic idea between the difference in funding between home-based support and SILA. So this is sometimes helpful for that decision making. Now, this is a very oversimplified model. I'm going to show you a much more complicated model a little later. But essentially with home-based support, DHS says, this is how much money you get every month to purchase services. And they give it to the person or their family. And then that family or person decides who they're going to pay to get services from. And so a lot of times that's personal support workers, so just people, you know, who are providing that one-on-one support. And it can also be an agency service. you can see it's like that the interaction, the exchange is really much more between the family and the services or providers than in the SILA model, where DHS essentially figures out like in order for this person to receive 24/7 support, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. And then when that person finds an agency that they want to work with and that has space to work with them, DHS gives that money to the SILA agency, and the SILA agency then pays for all the services the person might want and then provides them to the person. Now, it's possible you might be working with more than one service provider, but a lot of times it all happens, at least around here, within one agency. So all the various pieces that you might look for come from one person. So this is sort of the difference. Okay, so we're going to go with home-based support. So we're going to say how does it work? Who's involved? How does it work to get started? What does the upkeep look like? How do you budget? I'll talk a little bit about what community choices role, and then just kind of, again, what you can buy, what's available locally. So home-based support is self-directed funding for supports and services, like I said. So it is a set monthly budget of funds that families or individuals can use to purchase those services. So for adults, and that's generally adults over the age of 22, you get $2,382 a month to purchase those services. And then every month, those funds start over from scratch. So, so you can't roll the money over from one month to the next. So if you only use $1,000 in April, you don't have, extra in May. For children, it's a little different. For children, so people under the age of 22 if you're in school, or 18 if you're not in school, they get $1,588 per month. And that funding is flexible, which means they basically do it because they assume, well, during the school year, kids are in school, and so they don't need any hours of support. And they want to be able to sort of flex that time, maybe over into the summer months or over breaks, so that families can have the support that they need. And so with this funding, it does roll over from month to month. So one month you could spend $100, and the next month you could spend, close to $3,000, and that would be fine. Okay, so how does it really work? DHS does not just send you a check for $2,300. It is, unfortunately, much more cumbersome than that. So for home-based support, there's all of these different people that are involved. So again, there's the person, there's the ISC, which once they get you settled with funding and a plan, they're not generally super involved in the day-to-day functioning of home-based support. In some situations they will, and they're certainly there as an advocate and as a support person if you're having problems. But for the most part, they're not doing the kind of nitty-gritty work of it. There's the employer. And so, DHS has got this $2,300 for you, and in order to purchase those services, they have to have somebody that's working as the employer, and that employer is the official name on all the paperwork that hires, manages PSWs, and approves the home-based support paperwork and timesheets. It's not, they don't get paid for doing that. They can't also be a PSW. So that those two things are separate, because you can't, well, you can be self-employed, but not with home-based support. So it's when you are getting started with home-based support, it's really important that you choose somebody to be the employer. And this can be the person. The person is absolutely able to be their own employer. For some people, that's more feasible than others. But all options are on the table. In general, for most people, it tends to be a parent, or sometimes some other family member or a close friend will work as that employer. And it's important to have somebody who's just able to kind of keep up on that paperwork, check in, make sure things are running smoothly. The next sort of most common person that you're going to have in home-based support is the PSW. And this is the support person who works directly with the individual. They can be providing companionship, they can be teaching skills, providing supervision, transportation, all sorts of different things. Pretty much there's not a lot that's not on the list of what a personal support worker can do. I see a chat. Is mom/guardian, I'm mom/guardian and employer. How would you find and hire somebody else to be the employer? That is a really great question. That can be really tough, I'll be very honest. A lot of times people do look to their natural support network. And so if there is another family member who was able or interested, hi Travis, welcome. If there was another family member who was able and willing to be the employer, that's usually people's best bet. If the parent, the most direct parent, is maybe wanting to be a PSW and can't be the employer. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who lives locally. We've definitely worked with employers before that live in Chicago or some other area. It can be a little bit trickier, but I will say in the last year, we've definitely all gotten better at like electronic documents. And so that's certainly a possibility. In general, yeah, great question. In general, an agency cannot be the employer. At least I don't know of any around here. Yes, it is a lot of paperwork, which an SCA can help with. And so that's kind of lower down here on the list. But essentially, an SCA is, they are from an agency, and you can hire them and pay for that service from your budget to help you manage all of that paperwork. So the employer, instead of like having to figure out the budget and get it all set up and communicate with all the PSWs, that's something that the SDA can do. And so they generally are doing it for lots of people. So they've run into a lot of the weird sticky situations and can help you traverse through them with less trouble. Many people do it on their own too, though. And so if you're feeling like you've got the time and it doesn't feel hard, then that's a great option for you too. So that is a service that you do have to pay for. It's one of those waiver services, and those rates for those services are set by the state. Currently, the rate for that is $26 an hour. In general, so just speaking for community choices, when people are just getting a home-based award and we're getting everything set up, that takes a lot more time than just maintaining it. So we usually will charge people 4 hours a month for the first, usually 4 months. Sometimes it's less if people just are off to the races. Sometimes a little more if things go haywire. And then in general, it's 2 hours a month after that. And I think that's pretty typical. I think that's about what DSC is, the other agency in town that does that. Yes, community choices can be the SDA. We currently had our SDA for I think 31 families. So yes, that is something we definitely can do. And really it's just, oh, great question. What does it stand for? You guys are fabulous. I should have put that on the slide. It stands for a self-direction assistant. And it used to be called service facilitation. So if you hear somebody say that, it's basically the same thing. The state changed the name a couple of years ago. But yeah, so an SDA would do things like make sure people's enrollment packets are all completed, getting that initial paperwork done. They would work with you to figure out exactly what your budget was, so how many hours for each thing a month you can bill for, and they can also help you turn in timesheets. If somebody doesn't get paid on time, they can make the calls and figure out what went wrong. So it can be helpful. The other sort of most important kind of person or service that's involved in home-based support is access, spelled weird and with a $, which I will never in my life spell the word access correctly with 2 C's again, because I've been spelling it like this forever. But they are essentially the fiscal agent. So the state knows that families who are using home-based support are very unlikely to have the knowledge, resources, time, energy to figure out exactly how to pay payroll taxes every couple of weeks, and to make sure that they're cutting checks and getting them direct deposited into people's bank accounts. That would be far and beyond what any family is likely to be able to do or want to do. And so Access is a third-party organization that is contracted with the state of Illinois to do all of that for the families who are using home-based support. So they essentially do the payroll. That's like their biggest piece. They sign people up as PSWs so that they're in the system so that they can bill their hours when they're working with somebody. And then once they receive timesheets for that person, they send out either the check or the direct deposit to get them paid. They also will do, they pay the payroll taxes, they send out W-2s at the end of the year, and they make sure that people are not spending more money than that 2382 per month that the state is giving them. There isn't a charge for that. It's just part of the structure that the state has set to make that work. And so your SDA is very likely going to be in communication with Access a fair amount, or if you are the employer or the guardian who's using services, you are likely to, be in contact with them as well. And then there's the agency-based services. And again, like I said, those can be pretty much anything. It could be like a day program. It could be a behavior support. It could be an agency PSW. It's going to look different depending on where you are, what you're looking for, what's available. And those agency services, almost exclusively, the state sets the hourly rate for those. So, day program has a code and a rate that's set by the state, and that's how much it costs. PSWs, the employer, the family, the person, they get to decide how much PSWs are paid. Obviously, it has to be above minimum wage, but yes, they most people pay between $15 and $20 an hour to their PSWs. So that's kind of who all is involved. And I don't know, I love a flow chart, so you'll have to excuse me. So this is kind of how it works. So you've got the person down here in blue. You've got DHS with the money up here. And like our first little graphic, like it's not so simple as the money flowing down to the person and then them distributing it in, cash or personal checks to their workers. DHS is essentially giving the money to Access for the most part, or paying service providers, those agency services directly. The SDA, if you have one, is going to be doing a lot of communication with Access to make sure that like all of the PSWs and these type of things are set up. Access is the one actually paying those PSWs. And the employer is there to essentially give instructions to Access and to the PSWs. They don't do as much with the agency services, mostly just because there's not as much you have to do on a daily basis to sort of manage that. Yeah, so those little dashed lines, this is like where the money is flowing, and then the solid lines are more like, these are people who are keeping in communication in order to keep things running smoothly. Sorry, my nose is just so bad tonight. Yeah, that allergy time. So if you're the employer and you don't have an SDA, you end up having to do a fair amount more of these like instructions and paperwork and stuff. So moving on, so getting started. So when getting started with home-based support is 100% the hardest part. And I always warn people about this because they're 2 months into it and they're very confused and like there's been a glitch in payroll and things are taking longer and they're like, oh my God, how is this helping me? Like this was a lot of promises and it's just making my life harder. Once you get it set up, it generally runs pretty smoothly. So essentially, first you choose if you want an SDA. If you don't, you kind of move forward on the next steps on your own. If you do, the SDA will walk you through all of this. So the first thing you really need to do is choose an employer, because nobody can get paid until there's an employer. Just like, I wouldn't be paid by Community Choices if Community Choices didn't exist. They are my employer. Again, it can be the person, a family member, a friend, somebody else. It can't be somebody who owns their own business. And this was something I learned really recently. It's a weird tax loophole that I honestly don't fully understand, but we have not had success trying to work around it. So we have run into a couple of situations where both mom and dad owned their own business in some capacity, had their own EIN, and so we've had to get a little bit more creative about who is the employer in those instances. They then do this employer packet, which is about 15 pages, mostly signing your name and writing your address, and it basically gives access, permission to do all of that sort of payroll, tax stuff that normally an employer would be responsible for doing themselves. Then you need to choose some PSWs. So the basic qualifications for being a PSW are being 18, not being the employer, being able to pass a background check. And if you're on the child's waiver, parents can't be the PSW until they're 18. Obviously, you want to look for somebody who is trustworthy and has, gets along well with either you or with your family member, and is kind of on the same page about the type of things they might be doing. Then they do a PSW packet, which is slightly longer, and it's like 20, it's I think 28 pages, so don't be scared. It's pretty long. And then you send that off to Access. They process it, and then that PSW will get some paperwork in the mail to go get fingerprinted. It doesn't cost them anything, but it's part of that background check process, and they can't start working and they cannot get paid until they have done that whole packet and gotten the fingerprint and the result back saying, like, you're good to go, you get your start date. You also can't get paid until the employer packet has been, has been fully, been fully processed. And that can take anywhere from a month to 2 months. And so you might have PSWs who are like hired, ready to go, have been fingerprinted. They can start billing hours, but they actually will not get a check until that employer packet has been processed. And so that's actually, I make a point of that, even though it's rather dry, because if people don't know that, you hire somebody and then they're not getting paid for 2 months, it can certainly burn some bridges. Yeah, and so I had a couple of comments in the chat. Access is their customer service is really good. They've gotten better over the years. I remember working with them like 10 years ago, and it was like it was harder. It's gotten much better. They're very helpful. You can always get somebody on the phone who's usually able to answer your questions, and so that is a really nice kind of feature. Like, don't be scared. There are people to help. It's not like having to call like DHS when something happens with your Medicaid, like, or just like, I'm gonna have to spend all day. It's not like that at all. Somebody picks up the phone and you talk to a real person. So then you have to choose how much your PSWs are getting paid. And then once everybody is approved, you can start that billing process. And so there's 2 pay periods a month. It's like the 1st through the 15th and the 16th through the last day of the month. And then people usually are paid on a Friday, like the second Friday after the end of the pay period. So yeah, Hannah, it sounds like you have to go, but thank you for coming. So that can be just something to sort of think about, especially if you're hiring people outside your family, where you're going to be able, those like when am I going to be paid process can be like a little bit more formal. So it's good. They have a schedule, so you can usually see when things are going to be processed. You can submit paper timesheets, so there's an actual paper form that you can scan and email or fax. But they also do have an online system where if everybody gets signed up, that usually, I really encourage people to use that, because it's really easy to run into math errors when you do it on paper. People often kind of struggle with that a bit. Before Access will pay, the employer has to approve the timesheet. So this is kind of the most regular duty of the employer, is to every couple weeks is to look over the timesheets and say, yes, these are correct. If there are any mistakes on the timesheets, if the budget is wrong, if you wrote the wrong date, if you didn't add things right and you put a, 0.3 instead of 0.5 when you were talking about hours, they won't pay until you correct it. which because the period between when you submit the timesheet and when you are actually paid is so long, it can mean that people are sometimes not paid for the hours that they worked for up to a month. And sometimes that's not a big deal depending on what the person's sort of situation and resources are. But there's lots of families and PSWs who depend on this for rent and food and for childcare and all that. So so making sure those things are correct is very tedious, but is actually a really important part of keeping the program running smoothly. So this is an example here of what the timesheet looks like. I know it's not very clear, but to like write the time, and then you have to like, I don't know. There's a lot of boxes to fill in, and again, the math is surprisingly tricky. Yeah, absolutely. I will be happy to send along the slides for everybody if they are interested. Yeah, so again, online timesheets, I kind of went over that. So now here's the budgeting part of it. It's the fun math portion of the evening. So this kind of blurry sheet here on the right side of the slide is what they call the service authorization. And if there is one form or one piece of paper that is probably the most important piece of paper when it comes to home-based support, it is this humble form. And this form essentially says, who are your PSW? Well, who are you, first of all? Who are you? Who's your employer? Who are your PSWs? How much money do they make? And how many hours are you approving that they can bill every month? And so if you do the math wrong and say, oh, they can bill 150 hours, but really it's 149.75, somebody's not going to get paid because they're going to submit a few too many hours and it's going to be over budget. And then you've got to take it half an hour off or a quarter of an hour off. And it can, again, just really slow things down for people. Sorry, Kim is not doing my chat reading. So, but yes, somebody had mentioned that like once you've gone through the process as the first PSW, it totally does get easier. It's like, it's overwhelming. It's a lot of paperwork, but it's not too bad once you kind of have done it. But essentially what you do is you start with your initial budget. If you have any agency services, I usually subtract those from the budget first. For the lion's share of families, it's just going to be PSWs and an SDA. So that's kind of what I've used here. So for 2 hours a month, that's $100.52. And so you subtract that. So you've got $22.88.48 left for PSWs. And you pay your PSWs $15 an hour. So your PSW is getting that $15 an hour, but you also have to pay the employer taxes. And so you have to add, right now it's like 8.5% to whatever that hourly rate is to get the taxable hourly rate. And so you take your remaining budget, you divide by your hourly rate, and then you get how many hours are left over. And you have to, I'm sorry, I said round up. In this case, you have to round down. It's always rounding down. I'm fixing the slide before I send them out. And so, because if you billed 140.25 hours, you would be over budget. You would have spent more than this 23.82 by cents, but that's enough to kind of send things haywire. And so your total available PSW hours is 140. And so let's say you've got 4 PSWs. You can just put that 140 hours in the box where it says total. And then you just write shared in the last column. And then it doesn't matter if somebody's using 100 hours and 3 other people are sharing their other 40. It's just cumulatively, you can't go over that amount. And so it's not too hard. It's a little bit of math. It's, again, like small little errors or rounding mistakes can make things get a little bit tricky. So how do you keep things kind of running smoothly? So these are sort of just the general things that you can expect if you are using home-based support. Did you say something, Susan? Or somebody? I heard I can't see all of you because you don't fit all on my screen, but so essentially bi-weekly, That's the turning in of the timesheet. So PSWs need to be giving their timesheets to the employer approves them, and then you send them out to Access to cut the checks or to direct deposit. Every month, it's good to review your budget, make sure you're billing the right number of hours for the second half of the month to balance out the first half. In general, your SDA will probably check in with you at least once a month if you haven't already called them about something else. The SDA is also going to kind of, if you maybe use day program services in addition, they'll probably reach out to their agency and make sure that you've got their numbers and their billing information all correct, so that's taken care of. But then biannually, so every 6 months or so, at least, you'll hear from your ISC, and they'll come in and do a visit or a phone call and make sure things are going well. Once a year, obviously, they're doing that person-centered plan. And you can always reach out to them more than that. But if things are going well, twice a year is about when you would hear from them. And then annually, again, the ISC is going to do that plan, which is part of those waiver services. The SDA is going to, once that plan is completed, they're going to help you with a form called the Employer of Record Implementation Strategy, which basically says it takes those outcomes, those goals that you identified in your plan, and it's very brief. It's a brief form that basically says, here's all the goals or outcomes that this person has said they want. And this is generally who's going to try to help them with those things and maybe a little bit about how. The SDA is also going to look over all of the service agreements. And so this is a form that basically just says, between you and your PSW or any other service that you're using, I'm agreeing that it's okay for me to pay you. And it doesn't do much except for sit in a file somewhere. But anytime, also often once a year, you're going to update that service authorization too, which is the one that goes to Access, which is really important. They sound very similar, which is another thing that makes this program needlessly difficult. The service authorization is very important. Service agreements, they're important, but less so on a practical level. And then whenever something changes, this is really what tends to send things in, getting things out of sync, getting them off the rails. So this the most often thing that's going to happen is that there's a budgeting issue. And this might be because maybe the state has raised rates a little bit. So maybe the day program services that you are purchasing went from $11 an hour to $11.21, and so your budget changes, and so then you've got to kind of reassess and make sure that you have the right amount of money to pay your PSWs and adjust those hours a little bit. And then something goes wrong, a PSW doesn't get paid, somebody doesn't fill out a form correctly. You'll have to do some of that troubleshooting. Okay. So again, what can you buy locally? I think I kind of went over this. So, but just again, here's the things that are available here locally. Some common myths and misunderstandings. So, number one, the funds that the person gets from home-based support will not affect their Social Security benefits. The person is never actually getting any money directly. It's not income. It's not going to mess up your SSI. It's not going to put you over SGA. If you've got sort of disability payments, it won't affect it at all. They don't even ask about it. The two don't really interact for the person. The home-based support funds also cannot be transferred directly into an ABLE account or a special needs trust. So again, this money is just money that is for services. However, if a parent is working as a PSW or maybe billing any additional hours that other PSWs haven't, worked at the end of the month because they live with the person, they provide lots of unpaid support. Sometimes if it's within sort of the budget of that family, sometimes they will take those wages and put them into a trust or into an ABLE account, and they can do that because that's their wages. You can do whatever you want. You can buy a pony if you wanted with your wages, but it can't go directly from home-based support into one of these kind of long-term planning accounts. The other one is sometimes people will say like the waiver is your golden ticket to pay for everything that you've ever needed. And it's really not. Partially because kind of what I was talking about with the that waiting period, we're fortunate here to have a lot of services that you, I mean, it's kind of double-edged. On one hand, we have a lot of services that you don't have to use your waiver to pay for. You don't have to have a waiver to access. But then also, you can only use those home-based support dollars to pay for things where people will accept it as payment. So the analogy that one of our board members often uses is like gold bars. Like, okay, here's $2,000 in gold bars. Like, fabulous, I'm rich. Oh, but I really need milk. You can't go to the store and buy milk with gold bars. And so that is a limitation of this program. So, but again, there are, you know, with PSWs, you do have a lot of flexibility in what kind of support you're actually getting. This is just another like weird sort of tax thing, which is that if you live with the person that you're a PSW for, you don't actually have to pay income taxes. It's a weird IRS rule. It has to do with like caregiver supports and how those are considered. And for some people, they're like, great, I don't want to pay income taxes. And for other people, it messes them up. And unfortunately, it can't be helped. There's no getting around it. If you live with the person, it's just kind of the way it is. One of the forms that you'll fill out in a PSW packet asks you about some of these different relationships. So like if you are living with the person and you're married to the employer, there's like a couple other kind of like weird like exemptions that you fall into. And access will automatically apply those. So you don't have to do anything, but sometimes people at the end of the year will be like, why is there no taxable, like no taxes taken out in my W-2? So just like to give people a heads up on that so you can plan accordingly. And then home-based support can't pay your rent. Unfortunately, again, unless you are, you know, using somebody else's, they've billed and they're using their wages to pay your rent for you. It is really just to pay for support. So there are some other programs that can help pay for housing, such as housing vouchers through housing authorities. We all know those are a little difficult to get. The only way to pay for housing costs through the waiver is to choose that SILA 24/7 support option. And so kind of coming to a close, oops, another question. Oh, please explain the tax issue. So it really only comes up if you're living with the person in your PSW. So if you are a PSW for your adult child, but you guys live in different places, there is no weird tax thing. If you're a PSW in Bill, they're gonna take out your normal income taxes and Social Security, Medicare, all that stuff, like if you were hired anywhere else. It's really just if you are living with the person that these things get strange. If you're, those ones get very specific and it's quite complicated. It's a good one to call Access about, or if you have an SDA, we can certainly talk to you about it too. So then these are just sort of my tips from experience of kind of how to get the most out of home-based support. Usually the first thing I'll tell families when they kind of come and talk to me and say maybe, hey, I got an early notification letter or we just got pulled, what do we do? Is to identify what are a few things in your life that you would like to be different. And so it's like, I would really love to be able to like go to the movies more. I would really love to be able to take an exercise class at the park district, but I've always been too nervous to go by myself. Or like, I just want to leave my house more, or, you know, anything, to really just figure out what a few of those things are. And then when you start trying to find PSWs or think about who could be PSWs, to try to find people to help you do those exact things. Because you can hire somebody to say like, I want to go out for dinner every Thursday. And as long as you can pay for your own meal, you can totally pay your PSW to pick you up and go out and have dinner somewhere. But again, a lot of times this is maybe learning new things, working on projects. So that's something that comes up sometimes, like maybe this person has an interest and they just need somebody to kind of help them coordinate or pick up supplies or just hang out with them while they do it. PSWs can do that. And they can also do like really practical things. Like it would be really awesome if my adult person that I'm living with was able to do their own laundry and put it away. You can hire a PSW and their focus can be come in once a week on laundry day and you know, figuring out what that looks like for you and your family. So those are always really good things to think about when you're getting started, but also whenever. I also encourage people to hire multiple PSWs and to not just rely on parents or family if possible. I know that some families really depend on the income in order to support their adult child to stay at home because maybe they were not able to work, and I absolutely respect that. If that is not your situation, helping that person like get out and having kind of independent experiences kind of on their own, sort of develop their own identity and discover their interests and have some of those new experiences can be really, really powerful for people. So I definitely encourage that. And definitely do not be afraid to tell your PSWs what you want them to help you with. So a lot of times, you know, like it's hard to sort of know, and it can be really uncomfortable if you've never been in that kind of supervisory position to say like, hey, I'm hiring you to do this. Like you might say like, hey, I really, you know, like I need support on Thursday nights. Like that's great. And maybe most of the time that's just where it ends. But if you really need help with that laundry, it is 100% okay to say, I need you to spend an hour on the laundry every Thursday night. And so hopefully you should be able to find PSWs who are able to have those conversations with you and with the person and to figure out the best ways to accomplish those things, to discuss ideas about how to make them, like how to make that process fun and doable. But to really, you know, kind of approach it as like thoughtfully as possible. Oh, and so again, home-based support and doing these self-directed models, they really do require a lot of coordination. It's hard for organizations to do as the same exact type of coordination that families can do. But it can also be great, you know, because this natural support one, right? It's wonderful, and it's also tricky because it's not 100% guaranteed all the time, right? Life happens, and then it can be hard to maintain if families are getting older and maybe their own kind of priorities and health and all of these things are changing. And so that can be tricky, and having those conversations early on is really important. So I had a question in the comments. So with the laundry example, can the PSW be expected to actually do the laundry, not just advise or supervise the person doing laundry? This is a kind of a gray area. I would say that the PSW's role first and foremost is to help that person figure out how to do those things for themselves. If it was a situation where, you know, and I've worked with some people who use home-based support, and they actually have a lot of like physical support needs, and like doing laundry might just not be in the repertoire of things that is physically very practical for them. And in those cases, yes, I think a PSW would absolutely, like, you can be like, yeah, I need somebody to come and do my laundry. If the person is able to do it themselves to some degree, or maybe could learn, I think having that PSW support the person to do as much of it as they can and to build on that would probably be ideal. But I think it's important to not think of PSWs as like a paid like maid service. I mean, I don't know. Ultimately, those are conversations that happen between the person, their family, your employer, and the PSW. And if that's something that is like, we've agreed that this is what works for us, nobody's going to come and say you can't do that or you billed for the wrong thing. So it's kind of a gray area, if that helps. And then, why are these options wonderful? Because they are multifaceted. And that everybody here, all of our lives are built piece by piece and made connection by connection. And I do think home-based support does give folks a more authentic way to sort of build that same type of, you know, lovely patchwork of experiences and communities and people. And again, they often involve a lot of natural supports, which is, you know, those are the ones that are so meaningful. And also, I think it tends to have encourage people to have high expectations for themselves and for their family members. And I think we all know that like people are often much more capable and resilient problem solvers than we give them credit. And we have those high expectations, like people do really blow you away. Yeah, so that is home-based support. And yes, a PSW could absolutely help them look for a job and provide job support. Is there other questions? Oh, great, here, yes, I will copy your, if anybody else wants the slides and that you're not already on our mailing list, if you want to put your email addresses in the chat, I will send those out to everybody. And I think I have been recording too, so I may try to figure out a way to post that somewhere. So that was good. And if you think of something later, my email's down here at the bottom. It's just becca.communitychoices@gmail.com. Feel free to send me an email or give me a call. Happy to. I know there can be some like odd, like, oh, I mean, I've been helping people with home-based support for like 12 years, I think. And like every once in a while I'll run into one of these like weird questions or problems. I'm like, oh, I've never heard that one before. And it's kind of fun to puzzle through it, be a problem solver. So yeah, so thank you all for coming. It was great to have you all. I hope that you all learned something new, and I will be sending that along.
Reassuring to know that we were doing things right. So
Yeah. If you already have figured it all out on your own, like hats off, like well done. I know.
Yeah, they helped us out through Crosspoint, but everything you talked about, it's all falling into place now and it all makes sense. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming, everybody. I'm gonna record all your email addresses here, and I will try to send those out tomorrow.
Bye. Bye. This is Megan.
Good to see you guys.
Bye.